Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are opening up the files on one of the 20th and 21st century's most provocative and I think truly enduring comedic minds, the late John Barry Humphries.
That's right. And Humphries was so much more than just the characters he played. He was fundamentally an actor, an author, and a really profound satirist.
And his career spanned, almost 7 decades?
It did. It runs from the moment his first character appeared on stage in 1954, right up until his death in 2023. We're looking at sources that give us a really comprehensive examination of this massive artistic output and his often complex, sometimes controversial legacy.
Our mission today is to dive deep into that complexity. We need to understand how the character of a Dowdy Mooney Pond's housewife, as she started out, could eventually transform into this acid-tongued, internationally celebrated housewife gigastar.
The one we all know is Dame Edna Everage.
Exactly. And more crucially, we need to unpack how Humphries used his very personalized, often aggressive satirical performance as a tool to both relentlessly critique and, sort of paradoxically, to help define Australian culture for the entire world.
And what's genuinely fascinating here is just the sheer scale and the radical progression of his career. You know, you have this transformation that begins with him staging daddiest pranks in a very conservative Melbourne street environment in the early 1950s.
Right.
And it culminates in him winning a special Tony Award in the theatrical capital of the United States decades later. The longevity of his main creation, Dame Edna, is just, it's virtually unparalleled in modern comedy.
Over 60 years.
Over 60 years.
Yeah.
She survived, constantly transforming her look, her target. That kind of cultural sticking power, reflecting and distorting society for 2 generations, is truly exceptional.
So to really grasp the intensity of Humphries' satire, we have to start not with the state, but with the very specific environment he was rebelling against.
Absolutely. The suburb.
Humphries was born in 1934 in Kew, Melbourne. His father, Eric Humphries, was a construction manager, and the family was decidedly affluent.
Very well-to-do. They eventually moved to a home described as a clean, tasteful, and modern suburban home in Camberwell.
And that really was the epitome of post-war Australian middle-class aspiration.
It was. And this affluent, almost aggressively comfortable setting wasn't just his home, it became the primary target material for his earliest satire.
It represented that strict conventional conformism he found so stifling.
Exactly. The sources highlight that his early life involved a lot of time spent alone, playing it, dressing up in the back garden.
And he figured out the utility of performance very quickly. Humphries himself later said that disguising himself as different characters gave him a great feeling of release, and that making people laugh was a really effective social strategy. He noted, and I think this is key to understanding everything that follows, people couldn't hit you if they were laughing.
That statement really does encapsulate the foundation of his entire career. Humor as a shield, but also a weapon.
Yes, a highly effective weapon of social disruption.
And he developed this powerful teenage rebellion against what he saw as the strictures of conventional suburban life. This rebellion, it manifested by him embracing the countercultural by becoming artistic.
A path which, ironically, was deeply distrusted by his otherwise sophisticated, affluent parents.
Right.
And there's a foundational anecdote that really illustrates this tension between his intellectual leanings and the suburban practicality he just rejected. When he was only 9 years old, his mother did something.
An act of cheerful but profound cultural destruction, really.
That's a good way to put it. She gathered all of his books and gave them to the Salvation Army.
And her explanation, with no malice at all, was simply, "But you've read them, Barry."
It's incredible. And this act of, casual disposal had a seismic effect on the young Humphries.
Of course.
Instead of curing him of his intellectual bent, it spurred him to become this truly voracious reader and collector of rare books, a bibliomaniac who would eventually amass a private library of some 25,000 volumes in his London home.
So it turned reading from just a pastime into an act of really profound preservation and defiance.
So his art wasn't just playful performance. It was fueled by a deeply intellectual and often anarchic reaction against that kind of anti-intellectualism.
And his education kind of fed into that. He was educated at Camberwell and Melbourne grammar schools, the breeding grounds of the Australian establishment.
And then he spent 2 years at the University of Melbourne studying law, philosophy, and fine arts.
Though he ultimately didn't graduate.
Right. But that time at university was crucial because it exposed him to European avant-garde art.
Specifically, Dada.
Yes, the deconstructive and nihilistic movement known as Dada.
Which is important to understand. Dada emerged during World War I, and it was essentially an anti-art movement. It rejected logic, reason, prevailing aesthetics. It embraced nonsense and irrationality as a protest against the societal failures that led to mass conflict.
And this wasn't just a theoretical interest for Humphries. It fueled these very practical, provocative acts of artistic anarchy that have now become part of Australian cultural folklore.
He literally moved Dada from the gallery wall onto the suburban street.
Absolutely. The sources detail a number of these specific pranks, all designed to intentionally disrupt the polite, orderly world of post-war Melbourne.
They weren't just jokes, they were statements about absurdity.
So let's break down a few of these specific acts. There was Puss in Boots.
Which was exactly what it sounds like.
A pair of new Wellington boots, just filled with custard and left on display. Pure grotesque absurdity.
And then you had the more socio-political pranks, like the creation of this mock pesticide called Platytox.
Right. It claimed, in all seriousness, to be highly effective against the platypus.
Which is an animal protected as a national symbol. So the joke was on anyone who would take that advertising seriously or failed to grasp the irony of wanting to poison a protected national icon.
And there were more visually shocking ones, too, like Creche Bang.
That involved covering a baby pram, this symbol of suburban innocence, in meat, and just leaving it somewhere prominent.
These were intentional acts of grotesque provocation.
He was also involved in early experimental music recordings, which he self-deprecatingly called wubbo music.
And he claimed that wubbo was a pseudo-Aboriginal word that meant nothing.
So it was pure nihilistic comedy. Art that openly declared itself to be meaningless, challenging the audience to find meaning where maybe none was intended.
This period of daddyist anarchy also led to the invention of his first sustained, recurring performance character.
And this was Dr. Aaron Azimuth.
Azimuth was his agent provocateur persona, a self-styled intellectual dandy and professional daddyist.
Known for dressing in a black cloak, a black Homburg hat, and heavy mascaraed eyes.
He would just show up uninvited to respectable dinner parties and art openings to comment or argue, often causing chaos.
So this was Humphries actively using performance to disrupt society. He was committed to embodying that anarchist outsider long before Dame Edna ever stepped into the spotlight.
So after leaving university without a degree, Humphries found his footing. He joined the newly formed Melbourne Theatre Company, the MTC.
And this environment, which was focused on producing Australian drama and revue, provided the perfect crucible for his satire.
The moment of genesis for the icon is remarkably specific, isn't it?
It is. The first sketch, featuring a Mrs. Norm Everidge, titled Olympic Hostess, premiered at Melbourne University's Union Theatre on December 13th, 1955.
And it's so crucial to understand the initial concept. She was conceived as a dowdy Mooney Ponds housewife.
Right.
Created specifically to satirize Australian suburban complacency and its deep-seated insularity.
Especially in the lead-up to the 1956 Melbourne Olympics, where Australia was suddenly preparing to face the outside world, she was just meant to be a simple, one-off caricature of suburban narrow-mindedness.
And this is where the mentorship factor comes in.
It's so important. Humphries credited his mentor at the time, Peter O'Shaughnessy, with nurturing and actively promoting the character.
He said O'Shaughnessy prevented her from being nipped in the bud after 1956.
He ensured that this sharp, observational satire was given a stage to develop and truly come to flower. It just shows that even the most radical satire needs an early champion.
Following that initial success, Humphries moves to Sydney and joins the Phillip Street Theatre. He revived Edna for these popular satirical revues like 2 to 1 and Around the Loop.
But it was while he was living near Bondi that he had this incidental encounter that gave birth to another career-defining persona.
A much gentler one than Edna.
Much gentler. This was the birth of Sandy Stone. Humphries met an elderly gentleman in the Bondi area who had this very specific, high, scratchy voice and a pedantic, almost ritualized way of speaking.
And that accidental encounter inspired the creation of Sandy Stone, who Humphries described as a gentle, grandfatherly returned gentleman.
Sandy Stone became the antithesis of Edna in a way.
Absolutely. If Edna represented monstrous ambition in this aggressive modern suburbia, Sandy Stone represented nostalgia, loss, and the quiet sadness of the past.
He was always talking about houses and furniture, trying to preserve these memories that were, inevitably fading away.
We could see how quickly Humphries tried to connect this specific brand of satire to a broader intellectual commentary. In 1958, he made his first commercial recording, an EP called Wildlife in Suburbia.
And significantly, the liner notes for this recording were written by his friend, the renowned modernist architect and writer Robin Boyd.
That collaboration is incredibly telling. Boyd was famous for critiquing the ugly, conformist, and culturally void aspects of Australian suburban design. He called it the Australian ugliness.
So by having Boyd write the liner notes for his satire, Humphries was directly connecting his stage comedy to serious architectural and social critique.
He was ensuring his work was viewed as more than just slapstick.
Exactly. By this time, the foundation was laid for what became his core trinity of satirical characters.
And this trinity would anchor his performances for decades, allowing him to explore every facet of Australian identity.
Let's break down the satirical function of this trio.
Okay, so first, of course, there's Dame Edna Everage. She is the progression from that simple housewife to a megastar or gigastar.
Defined by her gaudy dress, her acid tongue, and this overwhelming egomania.
She mocks the Melbourne obsession with aspiration and social climbing, representing the judgmental Protestant middle class.
Then second, you have Sir Les Patterson.
The complete grotesque opposite of Edna.
Sir Les is the priapic and inebriated cultural attaché, a notoriously disheveled, lecherous, and culture-free Roman Catholic from Sydney.
Often appearing with literal snot or dribble on his tie.
It's pure caricature. He satirizes Australia's cultural cringe and the worst manifestations of uncouth, oafish male political power and sleaze.
And finally, there's Sandy Stone.
The elderly man. His character deepens so significantly over time, evolving from a simple parody of speech into this really moving portrait of quiet decline.
Humphries eventually felt such a close, intimate connection to him that he played Sandy in his own dressing gown.
Right, requiring no makeup at all. He felt himself turning into him, really embracing the sadness of that character.
So this trio allowed Humphries to cover the entire spectrum of Australian society: aspiration, corruption, and quiet memory.
So with this creative arsenal established, the next major pivot point for Humphries was his move to London in 1959.
A crucial move for his intellectual growth and exposure.
It brought him directly into the orbit of the burgeoning British comedy elite.
He became friends with the major figures of what was known as the satire boom, performing at Peter Cook's seminal venue, The Establishment.
And this circle included some of the most intellectual comedians of the era, people like Dudley Moore, Alan Bennett, and the groundbreaking Spike Milligan. This was where that academic critique really merged with practical performance.
The sources detail a particularly memorable professional connection with Milligan, who is known for his highly chaotic and anarchic genius.
Right. Humphries performed alongside him in the 1968 production of Treasure Island. Humphries played Long John Silver.
And he described the experience of working with Milligan as one of the strangest and most exhilarating experiences of my career.
Which really underscores how he was drawn to comedic figures who pushed boundaries and just embraced controlled chaos.
While he was embedded in that London scene, Humphries also contributed significantly to the satirical magazine Private Eye, published by his friend Peter Cook.
And his most famous work there was the serialized cartoon strip, The Wonderful World of Barry Mackenzie, or WBM, which was drawn by Nicholas Garland.
This strip focused on a young, perpetually drunk Australian abroad.
And it was satirizing what Humphries saw as the worst aspects of Australians abroad. Barry Mackenzie was a vehicle for mocking Australian male chauvinism, provincialism, and a certain body lack of sophistication when confronted with European culture.
The satire was so potent, and to some, so offensive.
It used a lot of Australian slang and references to bodily functions that really shocked polite society.
It did. So much so that when the book version was published in the late 1960s, it was actually banned for a time by the Australian government.
And the official reason was that it was deemed to rely too heavily on indecency for its humor.
Which just shows the power of the satire to provoke an institutional reaction from the very establishment he was trying to puncture.
And despite the radical nature of his own characters, Humphries still maintained a steady and respectable career in traditional musical theater.
In the West End and on Broadway, yes. His first major break came in the original 1960 London production of Oliver, where he was cast as the fussy, morbid undertaker, Mr. Sowerberry.
He even brought that role to Broadway in 1963. Although interestingly, his feature number, That's Your Funeral, was cut from the original Broadway cast album.
So his voice is absent from the most widely distributed recording of that iconic production.
Right. But he later returned to Oliver in 1967 to star as Fagin in the Piccadilly Theatre revival.
A production that notably featured a very young Phil Collins playing the Artful Dodger.
And he reprised Fagin again in 1997 at the London Palladium.
But before he achieved that stable theater success, he had a truly life-altering, terrifying experience in 1961 in Cornwall.
While exploring with his wife, he fell over a cliff near the remote village of Zenor.
And the sources confirmed this was a massive fall. He landed a devastating 50 meters below, breaking several bones, including ribs in his back.
It was a life-threatening incident that required a documented helicopter rescue. The severity of the fall and the sheer look of his survival just underscore the precariousness of his life during that turbulent era.
He also started accumulating film appearances during this time, often leveraging his connections in the British comedy world.
He had that memorable cameo as the personification of envy in the 1967 film Bedazzled, starring Cook, and more.
And appeared in The Bliss of Mrs. Blossom in 1968.
But, as we noted, his true calling wasn't traditional acting. It was that unique, multi-character theatrical format he perfected, the one-man satirical stage review.
These shows would typically run for 2.5 hours, blending these carefully crafted monologues with musical numbers.
But critically, they relied so heavily on sheer ad-libbing, improvisation, and often aggressive, unpredictable audience participation.
And success wasn't immediate with this format, even in London.
No, his very first one-man show there, A Nice Night's Entertainment in 1962, received such scathing reviews that he might have been discouraged.
But by 1976, he finally achieved widespread, critical and audience acclaim in Britain with Housewife, Superstar.
A title that really signaled Edna's new inflated status.
It's vital to contrast this significant British breakthrough with his first attempt at American success. The exact same Housewife Superstar show opened in New York in 1977 and was, by all accounts, a disaster.
It was. American audiences, perhaps lacking the specific cultural reference points for the nuances of Australian suburban satire, or maybe just finding the tone too aggressive, they failed to connect.
Humphries famously summarized the negative reception by saying, "When the New York Times tells you to close, you close."
That particular market was just not yet ready for Dame Edna's grotesque brand of celebrity worship and abuse.
Despite that initial New York rejection, the 1970s marked a major turning point for Humphries and for Edna, thanks largely to his film work back home.
Right. He returned to Australia to co-write and appear in the film version of his cartoon strip, The Adventures of Barry Mackenzie, in 1972, and the sequel, Barry Mackenzie Holds His Own, in 1974.
The impact of that first film really cannot be overstated. Though it was nearly unanimously panned by highbrow Australian film critics who saw it as crude and uncivilized.
It was a massive audience hit. And crucially, it became the first Australian feature film in decades to gross over $1 million at the box office.
That financial success is often cited as a critical moment that paved the way for the subsequent Australian film revival.
It proved that locally made content, even highly divisive satire, could find a huge commercial audience. It basically funded the next generation of Australian filmmakers.
It also cemented Dame Edna's elevated metafictional status. In the sequel, Barry Mackenzie Holds His Own, Dame Edna was actually formally made a dame by the then Australian Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam.
So the character transitioned from fictional aspiration to state-sanctioned metafictional reality.
And that symbolic knighting really reflected the massive evolution of the character.
She ceased to be merely a satire of suburban dowdiness and became something far more complex. A perfect, exaggerated parody of a modern, vainglorious celebrity with a rampant ego.
So Edna embodied and mercilessly mocked the absurdity of modern fame, particularly the kind of fame that comes from simply declaring oneself important.
And the costume became absolutely central to this transition into a megastar.
Yes, we have to discuss the deliberate theatricality of her wardrobe. Her extravagant, custom-made outfits, often created by Australian designer Bill Goodwin, famously incorporated Aussie kitsch icons.
Oh, yes. Her gowns were deliberately grotesque and instantly recognizable. They feature the Australian flag, native animals, abstract representations of the Sydney Opera House, the boxing kangaroo.
These outfits satirize the very idea of national pride being conflated with garish, commercialized self-promotion.
And, of course, the signature outlandish butterfly-winged spectacles.
Which were inspired by the glasses worn by a real-life Melbourne eccentric named Stephanie Deste.
And furthermore, Edna's unseen family became integral to her public persona, and therefore the satire.
This included her long-suffering disabled husband, Norm, plagued by a relentless, almost lifelong onslaught of an unspecified prostate ailment.
Which was a running, very dark joke about the fragility of the suburban male.
Then there were her children, her daughter Volmai, and her gay hairdresser son, Kenny.
And these offstage figures, always mentioned, never seen, gave Edna endless material for her constant, judgmental, often passive-aggressive, and self-serving commentary on the supposed failings of everyone around her.
Now, in his one-man shows, despite all the audience participation, there was only one actor who ever regularly shared the stage with him.
English actress Emily Perry, who played Edna's long-suffering, silent New Zealand bridesmaid, Madge Alsop.
Madge's presence was just a masterpiece of silent comedic timing.
It really was. She never spoke in character, which made her long-suffering, stone-faced presence all the more essential as a visual foil to Edna's soaring, egotistical monologue.
Madge was the audience's surrogate, in a way, the witness who could only observe the monster Edna had become.
And Emily Perry continued in that role until her death in 2008.
So the American success that had eluded Humphries in 1977 finally arrived much, much later in the post-1990s era.
Particularly with his show Dame Edna, the Royal Tour in 2000, which toured North America extensively.
And this was a defining success. He won the inaugural Special Tony Award for a live theatrical event in 2000.
Which is an extremely prestigious recognition of unique performance. He also secured 2 National Broadway Theater Awards.
When asked what it was like to win a Tony, Humphries contextualized it for his Australian audience by comparing it to winning 1,000 Gold Logies at the same time.
And for you listening who might not be familiar with that context, the Gold Logie is the highest public voted honor in Australian television.
It's equivalent in cultural weight to something like a National Television Award in the UK or a People's Choice Award in the US, but with this deep national significance.
The comparison just highlights that the Tony win was the ultimate validation of his career, recognized on a truly international scale.
And the US embraced the Gigastar enthusiastically. This led to more media opportunities, including a semi-regular role on the hit TV series Ally McBeal,
where he played a judge. He even wrote a satirical advice column for Vanity Fair in 2003, which, however, was later discontinued.
The end of that column came after controversy sparked by a remark he made about learning Spanish. He stated that he worried he might inadvertently end up speaking the language to people he didn't want to talk to.
And while he defended the joke as satirical, it does highlight the increasingly fragile line he walked between edgy humor and public offense, a theme that would recur later in his career.
And speaking of media success, the talk show format proved absolutely perfect for Edna.
It maximized Humphries' incredible talent for ad-libbing and roasting celebrities in character. The Dame Edna experience in the UK featured huge celebrity guests like Sean Connery, Liza Minnelli, Dusty Springfield,
all willingly submitting to Edna's judgmental commentary.
And later, Dame Edna's Hollywood in the US drew equally impressive guests like Burt Reynolds and Cher. He even won the prestigious Golden Rose of Montreux in 1991 for the television special A Night on Mount Edna.
Behind the gaudy gowns, the cultural attachés, and all the critical success was a man with a rich, complicated personal life and significant struggles.
Humphries was married 4 times and had 4 children, including his son Oscar, who has since become a noted art curator.
The sources reveal a very dark and turbulent period in his life during the 1960s, a time when he was heavily dependent on alcohol.
He described his younger self with considerable regret as a dissolute, guilt-ridden, self-pitying boozer.
This dependency reached a frightening crisis point during a visit back home to Australia in the early 1970s. After a particularly heavy binge, he was found battered and unconscious in a gutter.
A moment of profound personal trauma, a true rock bottom.
Following that harrowing incident, his family intervened, and he was admitted to a private hospital.
And crucially, following this near-death experience, he abstained from alcohol completely for the rest of his life.
A massive commitment and a testament to his determination. He occasionally attended Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and later tried, though tragically failed, to help his great friend Peter Cook with his own alcohol struggles.
The sources really emphasized that his sobriety marked a critical turning point that allowed him to focus on and sustain his long career.
The commitment and discipline required to sustain a career of such depth becomes more apparent when we look beyond the stage personas.
Right. Humphries led a profoundly intellectual life that stood in direct contrast to the vulgarity of Sir Les Patterson and the superficiality of Dame Edna.
He was a prolific author of numerous books, not just stage scripts, but novels, and 2 highly regarded autobiographies.
His first, More Please, won the J.R. Ackerley Prize for Autobiography in 1993, which highlights that he was recognized by the literary establishment for his prose and memoir writing, not just for his comedic work.
And we mentioned his status as a bibliomaniac. His London home contained an immense collection, reportedly around 25,000 books.
Many being rare first editions, demonstrating his passion for the physical and historical importance of literature. He was also a member of the elite bibliophilic society, the Roxburgh Club, a group dedicated to preserving rare books.
He was equally passionate about the visual arts, which confirms the continuing influence of his fine arts studies at university.
He was a prominent art collector, particularly of Australian art. At one point, he held what was considered the largest private collection of Charles Conder paintings globally.
And he was a landscape painter himself, a great admirer of the Flemish symbolist painter Jan Frans de Boer.
This dedication to high art and literature provides the intellectual ballast that informed and sharpened his low-culture satire.
In 2012, Humphries, feeling a bit senior after decades of intense stage work, announced his retirement from live entertainment,
which led to his final major live performance tour titled Eat, Pray, Laugh.
The show toured internationally and featured his famous trio, Dame Edna, Sir Les Patterson, and Sandy Stone.
However, this tour also introduced a new and highly controversial character named Gerard Patterson.
Gerard was Sir Les's brother, presented as a pedophilic Catholic priest.
This inclusion demonstrated Humphries' ongoing willingness to test the boundaries of political correctness and societal discomfort, specifically targeting the highly sensitive topic of institutional failure within the Catholic Church,
which was a subject of immense public discussion globally at that time.
And this brings us to a period of significant, very public criticism late in his career. We have to impartially detail the controversy that arose in 2018 regarding comments he made that went beyond the stage characters.
That is correct. In 2018, Humphries faced widespread criticism, particularly on social media and from identity groups, for remarks regarding transgender people.
The sources confirm he made comments referring to gender affirmation surgery as self-mutilation and characterized transgender identity as a fashion, asking, how many different kinds of lavatory can you have?
To understand the resulting intensity of the debate, we have to recognize that Humphries was defending his right to deploy profound offense in the name of satire.
He was arguing that comedy should challenge social consensus. However, his critics argued that these comments moved beyond satire and into speech that was actively harmful and discriminatory toward a marginalized community.
We must note the direct consequence of these public statements. Following the controversy, the Barry Award, a major prize at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival named after him, was renamed.
It became the Melbourne International Comedy Festival Award the following year. This was a clear sign of the cultural shift and the changing landscape regarding humor and political boundaries.
Despite the controversy and those later comments, his extraordinary 7-decade career was acknowledged as foundational to modern Australian art.
Humphries died at age 89 in April 2023, following complications from hip surgery after suffering a fall.
And the depth of respect for his body of work was evident in the widespread tributes from public figures across the world, including King Charles III and the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese.
They all recognized his role in shaping the nation's identity through performance.
And in a final posthumous recognition of his lifetime's work, he was appointed a Companion of the Order of Australia, or AC, in the 2023 King's Birthday Honours for eminent service to the arts.
It capped off a career that began with staging theatrical anarchy in Melbourne and concluded with the highest honours in the land, a true reflection of the dual nature of his legacy.
What stands out when you look at the entirety of this deep dive is that profound dual nature of his work. He was an arch satirist whose characters mocked Australian society relentlessly, its aspirational vanity, its vulgarity, its provincialism.
Yet those very same characters became the most recognizable and enduring cultural exports of the very society he sought to critique.
He held up a funhouse mirror to his nation, and the nation, laughing nervously, embraced the distortion.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Barry Humphries' genius lay in creating these characters, from Dame Edna's grotesque celebrity and narcissism to Sandy Stone's gentle suburban alienation that functioned as profound mirrors for society.
He forced audiences, even when they were laughing, to confront their own insularities, pretensions, and political discomforts, all while simultaneously elevating the status of Australian performance on the global stage.
So, as you reflect on this complex life, consider this. Considering his immense influence on satire and his insistence, maintained right up to the end, on the right to give profound offense in the name of artistic freedom, how do we evaluate a public figure whose life work spanned and often actively redefined the cultural definitions of humor and controversy across 7 decades?
That's something for you to continue exploring.